Hello and welcome to today's show. Now, we've all heard that data is the new oil, but the truth is most companies are drowning in data and have no idea how to actually use it to move momentum forward. Thaija is co-founder of Contract IQ and the author of 10 times contract value. Today, we're talking about why AI often fails to get the job done.
I was going to say, thank you so much for having me. I'm honestly really excited about this conversation because I think a lot of leaders are feeling the same tension right now, right? They have more data than ever. They have more technology than ever. And then they're being told that AI is going to transform their entire business. But many of them are still stuck in pilots and they're asking, okay, where is the measurable value? So I think that this is a space that a lot of leaders are looking for answers. And it's the area that I care about. So thank you so much for having
You
me.
argue that contracts should be treated as tier one critical data. For a
Yes.
leader trying to connect AI to value, why is the legal nature of contract data more important than the statistical nature of
The way that I think about it is pretty simple, right? Most companies are not short on data. They are really short on usable business leverage. They may know that costs are rising. They may see that their margins are under pressure. They may even know that they have a customer that doesn't meet commitments or a supplier missed certain deadlines. But then they have the question of, okay, what can the business actually do about it? And that is where contract data is different. So kind of putting on my data scientist hat, descriptive analytics will tell us what happened, right? Predictive analytics will help us understand what to anticipate will happen next. But that contract data will help us move forward towards an actual action because it'll tell us what we agreed to, what rights the company actually has, what obligations exist, and what leverage the business may have to act right now. And that is why I believe that enriched contract data should be treated as tier one critical data. And honestly, in this market, leaders do not just need more information, they need decision ready intelligence. And that really shows them where they have the leverage in the business, right? Where they are exposed and where they can actually recover value. And that's and I will say when contracts are treated as just files in a repository, companies leave so much value on the table, right? When it comes to their revenue, their profitability, compliance, performance, and even risk. But when they treat their contracts as data-rich business assets, they become enforceable rules across the business. And then they're able to understand what triggers certain actions, what conditions can or must be met, and then what outcomes the business has a right to pursue.
you're based in America, right?
Yes, in Houston, Texas, in the US.
Many leaders view governance as the Department of No. But how do you rebrand governance as the Department of How when
Yes.
it comes to deploying artificial intelligence?
Yes. Unfortunately, like you mentioned, governance has gotten a bad rap as the place of no, right? Instead of the place of how. And they've built a reputation for just slowing things down. And governance does really need a rebrand because good governance should help the business actually move faster because there's clear rules in place. That's going to be especially important as we move more and more into AI because people need clarity, right? And I would say there's a few buckets of areas that the governance should focus on. First, the data. What data can be used and who should have access to it, right? Human in the loop. When does a human need to review an output or approve an action from the AI? When it comes to recommendations for AI, because everything is progressing from insight to now what you should actually do. What recommendations should be allowed, right? So it's recommendations with guardrails, not just whatever the AI comes up with. It's these are the guardrails that we're going to have in place for recommendations. Then ownership. When there is a recommendation, who owns that decision, right? Many times you have an insight and a recommendation, but who's going to carry that out to make sure that it's executed and own it? Errors and hallucinations, right? When there is discrepancies with the AI, who's going to be accountable for the AI when it gets it wrong? And then I would say the last part is controls for scale. So when you're ready to take the training wheels off of a pilot, right? What controls need to be put in place as you're scaling that? So those would be the primary areas I would recommend that companies focus on for governance because teams shouldn't be guessing when it comes to governance, right? They should be not running into friction, but instead governance becoming the operating system and a business accelerator. So I believe that that's how the governance department transitions from being the department of no to the department of.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I took a look about branding. So I
Mhm.
think an information management service should be branded. It's easier to
Yes.
sell something. And I use the
Yes.
word sell, people in our industry don't like selling, but
No.
we are effectively selling our service to business to get influence, to buy in, to get the stuff done within the
Yes.
organization. And I think it's really important where we look at information management services, the Department of No, it's a kind of a
Mhm.
rebrand. There's lots of organizations out there that rebrand,
Yes.
create a slogan,
Agree.
think of something, useful and effective that you can actually say, hi, I'm here
Yes.
and this
Yes.
is what I do. And it's easier for you to create that band to drive forward. I did a
Yes.
presentation with my general manager at the RMS
Yes.
in May, and that was around branding. So they had an M&M project and they
Mhm.
were moving the M drive. So all the organization talked about was M&Ms and the
Yes.
M&M project. When the drive closes down, and they were dressed in T-shirts, they had signs, reports, and it was really interesting how you can get an organization enthused with some of
Yes.
the initiatives for information management just by branding it something
Agreed.
different and giving out M&Ms and getting them
Agree.
to do taxonomies in M&Ms, peanuts,
Yes.
all those types of things. So
Yes.
it's very interesting based on what you're saying as well,
Yes.
is to rebrand and get that sort of fresh the Department of No.
Agreed.
So
Agreed.
if
Mhm.
artificial intelligence identifies as $1 million
Mhm.
value leakage in a contract, but no one is assigned to claw it back,
Mhm.
that data is worthless. How do you
Mhm.
define decision ownership in a way that AI generated it actually result in a bank deposit?
Yes, that is a very good question. And it's honestly one of the biggest gaps that I see today. Companies are very excited when AI finds something, right? It finds leakage, it finds risk, it finds a pricing issue. Then the question, like I mentioned, is then what's supposed to happen, right? Who was going to call the third party, or who's going to actually take on the action? Who's going to validate contract information? Can you actually take a certain action? Who talks to finance? There's so many different things that need to actually happen, but there's no clear decisioning trace that is there. And so an insight can just sit there, right? It's nice to have, but who actually carries that out to execution? And that's a critical point where I see AI value often die, right? It's not in the model, it's not in the dashboard, and it's not even in the handoff between, it is in the handoff between the actual insight and the action. And so that's where you see the bottom line impact. And when insight doesn't actually have a clear owner, it's just a prettier version of the same old problem. So to me, decision ownership really means every insight needs a named owner, right? At the minimum, it should have a role, right? A named role. And it needs to have a clear next step and the authority that needs to be in place, or an escalation decision. Then you also have the measured outcome, because you just don't want to have insights. You want to actually see how it's impacting the business.
Yeah, brilliant.
Mhm.
Now you talk about execution versus intelligence. So you've said AI fails at execution. Is that a software limitation, or is it because we haven't mapped the right decision rights, or is
Yes.
it specifically an AI output?
Another great question, and I'm going to tell
Thanks.
you it's both, right? So some of the issue is software design, and some of it's honestly just the company's overall operating model. So AI is going to identify the patterns, it's going to identify risks, it's going to summarize the contracts, it's going to make recommendations. But the execution context really still sits with the business, right? The accountability, the authority, what's the actual workflow? And this is where I find that leaders are often underestimating, right? A lot of companies want to connect the AI to the data, but they do not know what decision rights are going to be there that the AI actually needs, right? So the AI produces an insight, but no one knows who owns the approval of the action, like I mentioned before. Who owns that risk? Is it going to be legal? Is it going to be operations? Is it procurement or sales? Like what is going to happen after that actual insight produces itself? And that's where AI will often stall, as I mentioned. Now, every company is nuanced, right? But most companies are not as unique as they would like to think that they are when it comes to decision flows. They still need approval paths and escalation points and controls and measurable outcomes. But this is the moat where I think that solution providers can really help with this opportunity. So the best solution providers should not just surface insights, they should be actually helping their customers step into that execution model. So if you want AI to drive execution, you have to map out the output from the authority owner, the process, and the business results. So that's why I say I think it's a hand on hand, and I'm thinking I'm seeing more AI solution providers step up to that, and then some leaders realize that that's a gap that they have to start looking at before trying to throw AI at the problem.
Yeah, sort your
Mm.
information out before you put AI over the top of it. So
Yes.
there's a new saying I've been talking about quite a bit over the last couple of podcasts. It's
Hmm.
garbage in, gospel out, because obviously everyone's taking AI as gospel, which I just think is an amazing expression, if I'm totally honest.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah. So let's talk about the authority as outcomes. You said you were a data scientist. The data scientists have the tools, but no
Hmm.
power. And
Hmm.
executives with the power, but actually have no data to kind of make those decisions.
Yeah.
How does a leader bridge in the gap so that that person with the authority to act is actually seeing the AI decisions intelligence based on good data?
Yes. So the one principle that I use across the board in many aspects is start with the end in mind, right? And that's how you're really going to truly connect AI with the bottom line. You really have to bridge the gap from what decision or outcome you're trying to actually achieve. And honestly, too many AI programs start with what data do we have? But the better question is what decision are we actually trying to improve? And when you're trying to protect margin or cash flow, reduce leakage, avoid compliance exposures, you really need to have that identified and then work backward. So once that decision is actually identified, you can identify what data is actually needed because you don't need all data for all decisions, right? You need to identify exactly what data you need, what
Mhm.
data needs to be cleaned as a result, but you understand what data is needed. And sometimes when you identify the data, it may not require as much manipulation for that particular data set as you may anticipate given the whole grand scheme of things. But what data is needed, who's going to own that decision, and who's going to have the authority to act, and then what is the actual workflow. And then when you get an outcome, how you're going to actually measure that outcome. And that is what I've seen really change those executive conversations. You're not just bringing executives more data, right? You're bringing them decision ready intelligence that's actually tied to outcomes that they are accountable for. The data scientists that they understand the model, right? And the executives, they understand and own the outcomes, but the bridge is really going to be that decision intelligence.
So, talking about those measurable outcomes,
Mhm.
can you walk me through and listeners through a before and after scenario? So, for
Mhm.
example, what does a company look like when these five elements, so AI, data, governance, ownership, and authority,
Mhm.
are finally all tied up together?
The before state is you have searchable documents and searchable information, right? The after state is now you have everything interconnected for decision ready intelligence that actually goes to or strengthens the bottom line. So, what this looks like before, the company may be able, for example, to have a repository with their contracts or even a solution with their data in there, but the business is still acting reactively, right? A situation comes up and then they're scrounging around trying to figure out what should happen. I'll use a supplier increase because we're seeing a lot of inflation and tariffs coming into the market, or we have been. That's our new norm. But when it happens, who is going to approve it, right? And does a contract, what does a contract allow? There's so many details in all of these disparate systems that if you don't have that clearly flushed out, there's a lot of holes and inconsistencies and a lot of leakage that actually happens. So, everyone's busy, right? Finance is chasing numbers, legal is reviewing documents, procurement is managing suppliers, and operations is just trying to keep the boat from sinking, right? But the problem is everyone's working from partial information. So what happens in this after state is that the company has a connected intelligence layer. AI is going to surface that contract needs certain attention, and the data is going to be structured around a business decision. And governance then defines what can be trusted. Ownership then makes someone that's going to be responsible and accountable for what needs to happen. And then who has the final authority to make a call, right? And that's where the company company is moving from just where are our contracts, what do they allow, to where are we actually leaking value, where are we exposed, where can we recover margin, and where do we have an opportunity to act before a window closes. And that's really the shift of going from, just searching to actually having decision intelligence.
I want to talk about red flags. So,
Hmm.
what is the one sign a company's data strategy is all talk and no execution? Such a good question.
That is. And I would say that the red flag is when you're seeing that the data is not actually influencing and changing decisions. It's just decoration. If a company they can show a dashboard, but they cannot show what actual decisions were changed as a result from the insights from the dashboards, who acted on it, and what outcome was measured as a result, to me, that's just a red flag. At that point, it's not really a data strategy, it's just reporting. We've been in that for the last several decades, right? The line of sight has to be clear. Data has to go to a decision, and decision to an action, and an action to value. Otherwise, it's like I said, it's decoration.
Yeah, and just making sure if that data's come from AI that you
Mhm.
check the data that is correct from AI before it even gets to that
Exactly.
point.
Exactly. And that brings back the governance loop that you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, having those
Does indeed.
having those clear rules in place.
Yeah, it does indeed. So let's talk about mindset. So, for
Mhm.
listeners, if they could fix one thing in their information governance tomorrow to get closer to the 10 times value, where should
Mhm.
they start?
I think many times teams feel like they have to boil the ocean. So I would say don't do that, right? Pick one decision that actually matters. If it's pricing validation, is margin leakage, is cash flow, or any other type of measurable outcome that the company is actually prioritizing, then ask what information is needed. Who's going to own the decision, who has authority to act. If you see, I have this same mantra, because it's very is a clear workflow, but that's how you really move from information governance to value governance, right? This Once you have that foundation is clear, AI becomes a multiplier rather than it's just continuing to produce more information.
Yeah, so what did I say? Garbage in, gospel out.
Exactly,
Uh,
exactly.
so you're a fellow MBA and an MS like myself in 2006, which is more valuable for an information entrepreneur. And I'll say that because there's a lot of things around organizations where entrepreneurs are very much out there taking risks, financial risks. And then there's
Yes,
entrepreneurs that are
yes.
within organizations that are doing
Mhm.
exactly the same thing, but don't have that financial risk. So entrepreneurs. So I
Yes,
like to call them
yes.
information
I
entrepreneurs.
agree.
Knowing how to read a balance sheet or knowing
Mhm.
how to audit an AI's decision log, what's the one thing that they should do?
To be honest with you, I think leaders need to have both, right? I think that I'm a foundation principles person. Like, you have to have a foundational layer there, and AI is just a tool that you use to accelerate things. So technology doesn't really replace those fundamentals, right? Reading a balance sheet helps you understand where value is created, where it is lost, where the business has exposure. But then on the other side, being able to audit AI decision logic helps you understand whether the intelligence is actually influencing the outcomes that actually can be trusted. So the future leader really has to be the new bilingual, right? And technology, and then the fundamentals. They need to understand the business model, but they also need to understand how the data and AI are shaping those decisions inside the model.
Yeah, I agree. And
Mhm.
I'd add to that as well. There's a lot of
Mhm.
fear around AI is going to take our jobs. And I think it's really important that we remember we are people
Yes.
and people utilize AI.
Yes.
We feed it with things, our creativity, and
Yes.
expands. And I really think that there's a massive future for information leaders that they influence organization, utilizing technology, utilizing AI, but there's still going
Yes.
to be a value and a need for governance, for compliance, for,
Agreed.
influencing within organizations. And it goes back to right at the start, information is gold.
Yes. Agreed.
And,
Agreed. The
we
new
need to protect
oil.
and look after. The new oil, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's been absolutely insanely amazing to have you on the show.
Thank
You have
you.
your own podcast as well. Do you want to tell listeners what podcast that is and how they can
Um,
reach that podcast?
Definitely. So I have the 10x Contract Value podcast, where you can actually find it on YouTube and other podcast platforms. I also have a book, 10x Contract Value. It's an Amazon best-selling book. So it really helps leaders think about the unlock between their contracts and creating business value.
If today's conversation has really got you thinking about the kind of leader you want to be or the culture you're helping create, I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. Let me know what your biggest takeaway is. And don't forget to subscribe to Information Matters for more conversations that help information leaders and change makers creating different workplaces where people can thrive. Until next time, be bold, be brave, and be beautiful.